Arc 5, Stars that Engrave History. Chapter 33, Stratagem on the City Hall. The silent Pristella's siege had, up until now, seemed to be naught but a fanciful story. Walking atop of the stone slab, Subaru glimpsed the flowing waterway. The water running within was clear and pollution-free. Even now, it flowed on in its constant, well-established path. The mechanism which split the flow between left and right was still alive and well. As long as the floodgates resumed, anyone could believe that the peril the city was under was little more than a nightmare. Garfield, Captain, ya can't drag your feet, you know. Subaru, I know. The danger levels that the City Hall raiders face increases by 10% every second. Ricardo, in that case, we're doomed after the 11th second, aren't we? Well, that's probably true, actually. Garfield, who had taken the lead, narrowed his eyes as Ricardo's voice rang out through the air. However, the beastman's expression wasn't in the least discouraged. Carrying his sharp machete, he strode forward with vigorous steps, but not even his cavalier attitude was enough to relieve Garfield's tension and guilt. Ricardo looked no different from usual, while Garfield had clearly discarded his usual demeanor. Even so, 3 people who Ricardo considered family were hurt, and he couldn't be in a calm state of mind right now. This had been made clear back in the shelter. On the other hand, Garfield's self-confidence and recklessness had vanished and what remained was a cautious and more timid attitude, a change that emitted an ominous message. Subaru, well, I can't say that I'm any better off, either. It wasn't only those two who couldn't maintain their usual state of mind. Subaru's own injured condition, Beatrice's unconsciousness, and, most importantly, Emilia's safety, all of those weighed heavily on his mind. Even if he focused only on seeking a speedy revenge, experience had taught him that doing so would hasten a terrible result. This was the philosophy of the group, the City Hall raiders, who were striving for the best possible result. Having encountered no cultists along the way, they successfully arrived at the rendezvous point. And there. Wilhelm, Subaru Dano. Subaru, it's great to see you're all safe. The forms of Wilhelm and Crush drew near, as well as Julius, who elegantly stroked his hair. Julius, I'm sure you're worried out of your mind for Emilia-sama. Are you sure it's okay for you to be here instead? Subaru, in terms of overall priority, being here is more important, but I'm still anxious. But I don't know anything about Emilia's situation, and I can't do anything that might jeopardize her even further. Julius, I understand. Were Anastasia-sama placed in the same situation, I doubt I'd be able to remain calm. After nodding in response to his concerned words, Subaru turned to Wilhelm. The old swordsman exercised his arms with his eyes closed, warming up his body. How turbulent his mind might have been at that moment was beyond Subaru's understanding. However, as if sensing Subaru's gaze, Wilhelm opened his eyes and reached into his coat. He withdrew a mirror and handed it to Subaru. Wilhelm, Subaru Dano, this is the conversation mirror. In the heat of battle, I doubt I'll have any leeway to operate it, so I'll leave it to you. Subaru, understood. Let's move as planned. Placing the mirror carefully in his pocket, Subaru straightened his back. He'd been entrusted with the responsibility of establishing conversation with the other 2 groups. Subaru, who would be engaged in the least fighting, held one mirror, while the other was held by Ferris, who'd been traveling between shelters. The last one was held by Anastasia, who served as their source of intelligence. Ideally, these 3 would be able to work together. Crush, then, to confirm again. We are moving to the battlefield identified by Garfield-sama, where 2 demons are guarding the City Hall. One is a giant with 2 broadswords and the other is a woman with a slender longsword, is that right? Garfield, yep, that's right. Neither of them read just common swordsmen. Even if they wasn't fightin' seriously, I'd prob end up sliced in 2 by any 1FM. Going over all of their information once again, Crush was the first to speak again. Nodding at Garfield's response, she turned back to Julius and Wilhelm. Crush, the City Hall is occupied by Lust and those 2. I imagine that others cultists will make an appearance there as well. Have either of you heard much about Lust? Julius, my apologies. Even as a member of the Knights, my knowledge is scant. Sloth and Greed are much more famous, but both of those have been encountered by Subaru. Halfway through speaking, Julius had turned to Subaru. Subaru nodded, saying, Subaru, although, having seen Greed for myself, I don't believe that the stories about him are untrue. But, that empire. He took out its strongest knight? That seems a little suspicious. He's strong, but in terms of combat prowess, even I could match him. Although, he can negate any attack. Ricardo, and that wasn't due to your own combat strength? Subaru, not this time. Although wrath engulfed Greed with flames, it didn't hurt him in the slightest. His clothing was untouched. He didn't even break a sweat. Regulus's power could easily be called invincibility. How convenient. If that were true, then the City Hall raiders would eventually be forced to face the worst of enemies. Although he wanted to believe that such an unreasonable power couldn't exist. Subaru, obviously, we'd been in trouble and greed were here, but we shouldn't have to worry about that. Julius Reinhardt would never be absent when innocent civilians are in such danger. I think perhaps that he is facing a problem that leaves him unable to move. Like us, he's possibly caught in an encounter with other cultists. Only Julius seemed to understand what was passing through Subaru's mind at the moment. Prior to the start of all this, Felt and Reinhardt had come into contact with Heinkel. He could only hope that the obnoxious idea which had taken root in his mind when he'd heard about their meeting was wrong. Subaru, other than that, there's something that I want to confirm. The name Lust gave. Capella Emirata Lugunica. Why would she possibly call herself a Lugunica? Ricardo, she had to be mocking us. Every member of the royal family is well known. Crush, it still might not be misinformation. It seems too early to dismiss it as just a prank. Ricardo and Crush gave Subaru their differing opinions. The witch cult being what it was, either possibility was worth considering. The poor character of this Lust could be clearly heard in her voice. A prank, as Ricardo had said, was likely indeed, but she could also prove to be an enigma. However, in the face of those two proposals, Wilhelm raised a hand. Wilhelm, I do recall one thing. Subaru, what is it? Wilhelm, although I don't know of any Capella, I have heard a little about the reputation of Emirata Lugunica. That doesn't mean that there's any direct connection, but there was indeed someone named Emirata in the history of the royal family of Lugunica. Subaru. Surprised by this, Subaru's eyes grew wide as Wilhelm pondered with his hand to his chin. Wilhelm, her name traces back to before the Demi-Human War, before I joined the army. So around 50 years ago. At the time, Emirata-sama was known as someone very beautiful and very clever. Subaru, and Lust called herself Emirata? For what reason? Wilhelm, as for her intentions, I don't know either. Only, I've heard that Emirata-sama passed away due to disease at a young age. But, a state funeral was never held in her honor. Neglecting to hold a funeral for the death of a royal was practically unthinkable. Tilting his head, Wilhelm frowned as he attempted to explain. Wilhelm, times were hard, was the reason that they gave. However, the real reason was that the people didn't want one for her. Subaru, the people didn't. Wilhelm, although Emirata was very beautiful and very intelligent, she was extremely cruel, with an immeasurable amount of darkness within her. Therefore, even the royal family of Lugunica regarded her as a heretic, a fact hidden from the public. With only an unconfirmed testimony, saying such dubious words about the kingdom he served had probably left a bitter taste on Wilhelm's tongue. His words had begun to waver in the second half of his explanation. And everyone had seen for themselves Lust's harsh nature. Subaru, so Lust gave Emirata's name, but for what purpose? Wilhelm, if they're trying to slander the royal family of Lugunica, the name of Emirata won't be too significant. Hardly anyone remembers her these days. The result of Wilhelm's conclusion was a sigh of relief. Unlike the likes of Subaru, Garfield, and Ricardo, there were those who loyally served the kingdom. Crush, Wilhelm, and Julius's feelings were unfathomable. Such ungrateful, vicious ridicule toward the royal family was certainly not permissible. Subaru, in spite of that. Capella. Julius, any thoughts on that name? Julius turned his attention sharply as he spoke, seeing Subaru, who showed a bitter expression. Subaru, nothing, it's just. After a brief pause, Subaru scratches his head as he continues. Subaru, it's not just Capella. Regulus and Sirius too. And come to think of it, even Betelgeuse, but to say this is meaningful is impossible. Garfield, cut crap Captain and tell us already. What's so special about their names? Subaru, it's strange, you know? It's just, you could kinda say that they have the same names as the stars of my hometown, or something like that. Crush, name of the stars, is it? Subaru, come to think of it, my name, Subaru, is as well. No, it doesn't matter. It's a stupid thought. In response to Subaru, Crush widened her eyes, looking deeply interested. Seeing that everyone else shared her reaction, Subaru scratched his head. Subaru, don't give much strange looks, okay? My hometown named all the stars, and the archbishops just happened to share their names. I quite enjoy learning about the stars and their stories, so I know some extra details. Crush, really, that interest doesn't seem to be in accordance with you. Stars, huh? Subaru, my name, Subaru, also comes from the stars. That's why. Sorry if it's boring. Feeling embarrassed, Subaru neglected to delve into the details. However, Crush rejected Subaru's attempts to end the conversation. Crush, please wait, Subaru-sama. Are their names really coincidentally the names of your stars? Subaru, what do you mean? Crush, for example, could the names of the stars Subaru-sama knows be the roots of their names? From the reason of their founding to the activities they carry out, everything about the witch cult is shrouded in many layers of mystery. We can't easily discard something that they may share a connection with. Subaru, although surprised at Crush's unexpected questioning, was still lost in his own thoughts. Really, Subaru had always believed that the star-related names had been mere coincidence. Why? This was, after all, a different world. There would be no one else here who shared the knowledge of Subaru's stars. But could he say so for certain? In this very place, Pristella, Subaru had bore witness to Japanese architecture. And deeply rooted in Kararaji's culture, even reflected in the Kansai dialect, was Japanese influence, perhaps from Hoshin's own hand. Perhaps the establishment of the witch cult's ideologies had some root in modern knowledge known to Subaru. The archbishops being named after stars wasn't necessarily unrelated. Subaru, Betelgeuse, Regulus, Sirius, Capella, Julius, correct. Subaru said those were the names of stars. Are there any stories or anecdotes behind them? Maybe there's a connection somewhere. Subaru, thinking along those lines. He dug through the thinning memories from his original world, finally recalling what he knew of the stars. He'd once deeply loved celestial illustrations. Knowing that the origin of his name existed in the stars, Subaru had greedily immersed in drawings of constellations, and had engraved a number of stars into his mind. And associated with the name of those abominable sinners. Subaru, the underarm of Orion, or the hand of Orion. Crush. Hearing the word underarm in a place she never would have imagined, Crush tilted her head to the side. However, Subaru didn't register her reaction, gripping and shaking her slender shoulders, as he approached. Subaru, that's right. It's called the Hand of Orion. Crush, Subaru-sama? What is this hand? Subaru, Betelgeuse, the origin of his name is a star. His authority was the unseen hand, and that star's other name is the Hand of Orion. It was almost laughably far-fetched. But were they only related by chance? Were this merely an amusing coincidence of symbolism? Not Betelgeuse, but a star named Betelgeuse that was a familiar name to Subaru. The small mismatch had been the reason he hadn't yet noticed it. Subaru, Sirius is shining, and she can use fire magic, that's not subtle at all. At most it's a literal. Regulus is the little king. Isn't that exactly like that bastard's self-centered values? Then, Capella is... Crush, Capella is... Subaru, little goat. A goat. Capella's a goat. Digging through his memory, Subaru searched for some meaning relationship between the mythos of the stars and the archbishops of sin. A smirk emerged on Subaru's face, as if he were saying not bad, not bad. Instead, listening to Subaru's answer, Crush kept her brow pressed down while holding his shoulder. Then she looked to the other four people, they are also a complex expression. Julius, Orion's hand? Wilhelm, shining? Ricardo, small king? Garfield, the hell's a little goat? Subaru, ah? At the reaction of the four people who turned their heads to, Subaru finally realized that his discovery was far more useless than he'd thought. Crush, Subaru-sama, I apologize. It seems my thoughts led us astray. Yes, even Crush looked sorry. The correlation of the symbolism of the stars and the archbishop's names had failed spectacularly. However, they had no time to waste lamenting that failure before launching a lightning-fast operation. As a result, they attacked after they shared and discussed their abilities and combat styles. The members of the Iron Fawn, who had accompanied Julius and Crush, went forth as a scouting force, ensuring that the way to the city hall was clear. The 6 of them would arrive safely. Garfield, yeah, it's just like last time, nothing's changed. Nose twitching, Garfield confirmed the lack of any new enemy presences. According to what he had said, after crossing the straight road ahead, he had been ambushed as he prepared to enter the city hall. But neither Garfield's nose nor Subaru's eyes found the silhouettes he had mentioned. If they weren't here, they could just directly take the city hall and move on. Just as Subaru wanted to celebrate a lack of enemies. Garfield equipped his shields and Ricardo held his machete in a battle-ready stance. Wilhelm, on the other hand, watched the plaza with the calmness of a tranquil lake. For those 3, this battle would likely turn out to be rather personal. In particular, Wilhelm surely had much he needed to confirm. Julius, this area is completely open. Although my quasi-spirits have been sent to patrol it, they found no path we could sneak along. It seems that our only option is to approach directly. Julius had sent his spirits to scout out their surroundings. The geography of this location was difficult to launch an attack on and likewise difficult to defend. Subaru, can't you send your spirits inside to scout? Just knowing how many enemies there are and the building's general layout would make our job that much easier. Julius, apologies, but my friends are still unable to perform an order that complicated. And the enemy isn't necessarily unable to detect the presence of spirits, so that would be difficult. Subaru, that wouldn't be your fault. Still, that's a shame, it would have been really helpful. Not knowing the circumstances of the city hall itself again increased the danger of a direct attack. That said, waiting would only cause the situation to worsen. Although the witch cult had claimed they were willing to negotiate over their broadcast, that was, in reality, extremely unlikely. Subaru, then, just as we planned. Although the enemy has combat effectiveness, we have strength in numbers. It's basically 3-on-1 for each of us. We'll handle this quickly, and then get rid of the guy who's occupying this place. Julius, although that's optimistic thinking, I look forward to our success. Julius gave a wry response to Subaru's speech, and the party took off. Without needing a signal, they ran up the straight road, toward the plaza in front City Hall. Holding their breaths, they waited for their enemies to surface. Garfield ran in the lead, followed by Wilhelm and Julius. Ricardo followed them, and Crush and Subaru held the rear. His right leg felt, for all intents and purposes, fine. Although it was in a strange state of feeling no sensations, he could run without hindrance. Garfield, they're here. Two figures fell upon Garfield, who stood in the lead. As the group watched the large blades and slender sword flutter in the air, a soldier among them courageously drew her own weapon. From the rear, the 100-man strike was unleashed. Crush had drawn her sword, and, augmented with wind magic, unleashed a strike that cut toward the enemy. Anything within her field of vision, even at great distance, could be struck by her. This was Crush's long-range swordplay. Her strikes had even made a dent in the white whale's magically enhanced defenses. The sound of steel on steel rang out, and the giant and woman whirled away. Subaru, did you get them? Crush, no, they deflected it. Her well-placed surprise attack had failed to make contact. While swinging their bodies to the side, landing neatly on the stone, the two figures, dressed in black, drew their respective weapons in a well-prepared defensive formation. Two giant blades and a single sharp sword. From top to bottom, they were indeed both clad in the despicable garb of the witch cult. Appearing to have completely brushed off the impact of that blow, they tilted their bodies forward slightly, about to kick off from the ground. However, before that, Julius, although you defended against Crush-sama's blow, can you take this? 3 different colors glowed from above, the light emitted by the spirits pouring down upon the cultists. Julius's 6 quasi-spirits, working in groups of 3, attacked the giant and woman. Another light of magic, which Subaru had never seen before, applied an appalling pressure to their enemies, forcing them to kneel. Against the unbearable pressure of their enemies, Garfield and Wilhelm rushed the woman, while Ricardo swung his blade over his head as he pounced toward the giant. Garfield, take this. Wilhelm, ha! Ricardo, it's over. In a flash of silver, emanating an overwhelming pressure, the sword demon took off. Garfield and Wilhelm's inhuman strength struck downward, ready to split the enemy's defenses open. If they could strike a kill at this interval. Woman. The kneeling woman turned her sword in her grip and slashed at Garfield and Wilhelm's legs. They immediately dodged, but the woman followed with the same trajectory, twisting to stretch a leg around Garfield's neck, moving him into the scope of Julius's magic. Garfield, wah! Swaddled in Garfield's arms, the woman protected herself from any magical effects using Garfield as a shield. Then, her knee shattered Garfield's nose as she grabbed his left arm with her free hand and used him as a shield against Wilhelm. At this profound display of skill, Garfield cried out in pain, while Wilhelm cursed. Breaking their stalemate, she kicked at the old swordsman, releasing Garfield in the process. Although her movements should have been constrained, her blow was powerful enough to send Wilhelm flying. Just as he regained his balance, she had already made another half-turn on the spot, delivering a swift follow-up kick. Giant. Meanwhile, Ricardo's attack stopped short of the giant's head. Still kneeling due to the magical effects cast by Julius, the giant had readily discarded the big swords he had held in both hands. Then, he lifted his unguarded hands and brought them over his head. Ricardo, idiot, you're finished. As a result of his flawed judgment, his arms would be severed. Even though Ricardo's machete was blunt, it contained incredible momentum and power. The giant's thick arms were amputated by the impact of the blow, and his upper arms flew through the air as red and white bones spewed forth. Giant. Ricardo stepped back and swept his machete up, aiming to bring it down upon the giant's enormous head. However, the giant simply retrieved his swords with his extra arms, deflecting the coming blow that should have been fatal. Ricardo, what? The giant then raised his arms, allowing a curtain of blood to spray forth, dispelling magic that Julius had cast. Now freed of that magic, the giant was again capable of the agile action that betrayed his enormous form. Having chosen to forego his arms, he was able to do away with an even more crippling weakness. Ricardo, unable to withstand the heavy blades that followed, had his arm caught by a blow as he barely managed to retreat from far worse. He groaned as the giant's fist collided with his face, sending the beastman's burly body flying backward. Woman. Giant. Against the three opponents who were now on the defensive, the woman and giant raised their weapons of special kind, with clear intent to kill. Finally having caught up with those other three. Julius, Felgoa. Julius's incantation ushered in a wind, which swirled with red flames sprouting from within. The resulting tornado of flames swiftly met the approaching woman, chasing her away from Garfield and catching her in its wake. Then, with a sound almost like a prayer, the sound of a slash and the whistle of a whip cut through the air. Crush's blade of wind coupled with a strike of Subaru's whip struck the giant's body. His huge form finally having taken a beating, a wound marked his chest. That injury was no serious matter for him. Even so, they had succeeded in stopping the giant's assault, and the fallen Ricardo kicked up at the giant's jaw. Ricardo, ha, you were asking for it. Subaru, is that the time to say this? Hurry back, Ricardo. Carried by the momentum of Kick's release, Ricardo spun backward, retrieving his blade and wiping his face of blood, before retreating to join with Crush and Subaru, ready to confront the giant again. Seeing that the woman had been enclosed in a cage of wind and flame, Subaru's eyes involuntarily widened. Subaru, what's that? You can actually use such spectacular magic. Julius, it's merely a bluff. I'm not proficient enough to make it lethal yet. Julius replied bitterly, the spectacle before their eyes confirming his words. As the woman bathed in that tornado of flame, the sword in her hand flashed, and the heart of that wind was pierced by her slight movement. Unbalanced, the cage collapsed. That woman's elegant, peerless swordplay. And the giant's own special physiology. Subaru, you're kidding. The front of his black robe fell open, and the giant's many arms were revealed. He nonchalantly picked his severed arms up from the ground and pressed them against his stumps, as blood and flesh knit with a sickening sound. A mere moment later, the giant's formerly missing arms were reattached, with only scant traces of the injury remaining. As if confirming that healing, he took his large blades in them again, proudly waving them around. Both looked undefeatable. Subaru, by contrast, it's clear that our blitzkrieg failed. Looking sideways, Julius and Wilhelm, protected by Julius's magic, were having their injuries treated by Garfield. The reality set in that Garfield and Wilhelm, working together, had been soundly defeated. That sense of despair could not easily be erased. However, it would be a mistake to say that their situation was completely hopeless. Subaru, although close combat is unreliable, long-ranged attacks could still be effective. Whether it was the Julius's magic, Crush's blade of wind, or even Subaru's whip, they still had a chance. The last one wouldn't be all that helpful, even if it did work. That sentiment was there, but the other two attacks could certainly have a chance to turn the tide. Subaru. At Subaru's comment and expectant gaze, both Julius and Crush nodded. Garfield and Wilhelm also understood the power of their opponents in close combat. From the start, Ricardo had not held any designs to face either of them alone. The melee fighters would temper their enemy's movement, and any gaps would be filled with magical attacks. This was likely the best way to minimize injuries and achieve victory. The unity of the entire party would start the pace of the battle again. Then, at that moment, chaotically, grudgingly, this conspiracy has arrived. What kind of garbage pieces of meat like you can, so foolishly, ugly, superficially dare to live? In the words of this elegant, patient lady, kahahahaha. Abruptly piercing the battlefield was an inconspicuously sharp laugh. However, upon hearing that voice, everyone understood that the appearance of the owner meant the situation had taken a turn for the worst. Subaru shuddered and shifted his gaze around, searching for that figure. Where was she? Where was that laughter coming from? Where are you looking, you dull, dim-witted pieces of shit? It's because of this foolishness that you can't be saved. Come on, open your dog eyes wide, and think hard with your empty heads. Then maybe this gentle lady will show mercy to your filthy souls. Crush. From next to Subaru, whose gaze swerved around, Crush had drawn a hoarse breath. Her amber eyes were fixed overhead. With a sinking feeling of understanding, Subaru followed her gaze, expecting to see lust at the end of it. The line of sight pointed to the roof of the city hall. Loud ridicule poured down upon them from there, as if the owner of that voice were looking down upon ants from a great distance. In fact, that was more or less the situation. That was because Capella, gahahahaha. Really, that face? That stupid face. Did you save it just for me? If so, this kind lady would give you foolish apes praise. Or would you prefer saliva? You'd be very happy with my precious saliva? For you pieces of rubbish, it must be a coveted treasure, right? Raucous laughter echoed through the air as Subaru glanced upward. The giant and swordswoman didn't have the slightest reaction, as an ally joined them against their fellow opponents. The Archbishop of Lust made a sudden appearance on the battlefield. Capella, then, once more. This lovely lady is the Sin Archbishop of Lust. As the name of Lust was announced, a black dragon looked down upon them with a smile. Capella, I am Capella Emirata Lagunica-sama. Die. You rotten slabs of meat. Chapter 34, Chaotic Duel. Standing on the rooftop of the city hall, a black dragon flaunted its wings at Subaru's group. Opening its mouth to reveal rows of sharp teeth and a long, snaking red tongue, the black dragon narrowed its golden eyes, continued to issue a choking, sharp laugh. That black dragon's appearance was more or less exactly how Subaru pictured the dragon species. It had the same aura of awe that earth dragons like Patrash, but its hair and physique weren't the same. If ground dragons averaged the size of a winged dragon, this dragon was as large as an elephant. With that physique, the black dragon couldn't possibly be capable of flight. Perhaps its strong wings merely served as a bluff. Yes, flight should be impossible. Capella, being ravished by your heated gazes isn't exciting at all. You meet creatures in heat. Ah, this is awful, being seen by people like you who can only think of sexual gratification. So I won't approach you. Fanning its wings towards the ground, a gust of wind is cast. A red tongue flitting outward as if licking her lips, the black dragon, Capella, gave a twisted smile. That dragon's expression was incredibly chilling. Because of the language barrier, communication was heavily to interpretation. Patrash was a good example. Because Patrash was so expressive, her stern attitude came off as quite likable. However, this dragon evoked nothing but disgust. Subaru, I haven't heard any mentions of this before, but can dragons speak? Julius, having lived for so long time, dragons are extremely intelligent and can understand human language. Logunica's patron dragon Volcanica, who tied a covenant with the kingdom, can of course communicate with mankind through language, but his expression isn't terribly rich. I've never heard of any other dragons having that ability. Julius, from beside Subaru, gave a detailed answer to his question. The Knight of Knights had his blade raised at shoulder height, eyes never leaving the black dragon. Of course, Subaru and the others were in the same state. Standing in front of them were two swordsmen of outstanding strength, and the black dragon, who had named herself the Archbishop of Lust. Their original unease had compounded into a wall of tension. Subaru, at the least, we have a chance of dealing with the swordsman. The woman, who wielding her blade with nary a flaw in posture, and the giant, who waved his swords around, as if refamiliarizing himself with Subaru's group. Although the extent of the swordswoman's strength was still unknown, the giant had chosen to directly take Ricardo's attack. Needless to say, it was not because of any clumsiness, but because he had a strategy in mind. Long-range attacks, their earlier plan, would still be incredibly effective. However, there was one pressing problem without a solution. Subaru, is there anyone here who's fought a dragon? Wilhelm, yes. Subaru, Wilhelm-san, seriously? Although Subaru had thought his question hopeless, Wilhelm had responded with affirmation. The old swordsman turned to face the surprised Subaru. Wilhelm, nearly 40 years ago, I was sent to subjugate an evil dragon named Valgren who appeared to Lagunica's south. The incident caused much diplomatic tension because of its proximity to Wallachia. Subaru, setting the diplomatic ramifications aside, how was the experience of fighting a dragon? Wilhelm, more than 10% of our knights were sent to the battle, and, although the crusade succeeded, 40% of those knights died. The crusade succeeded, but the result was considerable. Its ability to fly, its endless stamina, were things that we should have taken into better consideration. Subaru, it would seem that our situation is rather desperate. Seeing Subaru's despair, Wilhelm continued. Wilhelm, come to think of it. Wilhelm, compared to Valgren, this dragon is smaller in size. It should die upon beheading. Subaru and Valgren wouldn't? Wilhelm, Valgren had a total of 3 heads which all needed to be removed. Having finished speaking of that distant battle, Wilhelm tightened his grip on his sword. So beheading would certainly kill it. That was reassuring. Seeing Wilhelm's well-prepared stance, Subaru also took up a battle pose, whip in hand. Seeing their refusal to yield, Capella seemed rather surprised. Capella, my, you're all so disgusting. You're beaten and miserable, and, aside from my reinforcements, you're facing a sin archbishop. You rotten creatures should hang your heads and channel the meekness of mice, and yet you're acting all normal? Was putting you with all the other insects wrong? Gah-ha-ha-ha-ha. Garfield, stop fucking around. What can you do against our numbers? My amazing self'll go up there and crush ya. Capella, ka-ha-ha-ha-ha, the barking of this rabid dog is hurting my sacred ears. Or rather, I made a mistake. You're not a rabid hound, you're only a puny kitten. Meow meow meow, don't be angry just because that kitty you were with died. Garfield, wah-wah, hook. Faced with those cruel jabs, Garfield shouted, but choked on his own response. The dragon was clearly referring to Garfield's earlier defeat, where he had almost been beaten to death. Someone, Capella, had been watching the fight. And, what surprised Garfield even more? Garfield, bastard, how'd you know my amazing self's a demi-human? Capella, ha! How do I know that? Don't think so highly of yourself, not even a single of one your hairs interests me. I could tell that you were a filthy half-breed the moment I saw you. Go die the way you lived, as a degenerate beast. Speaking unspeakably cruel curses, Capella turned toward the rest of their party, sniffing the air. Capella, what a stench! What a stench! You slabs of meat all smell rotten. Moldy, rotten, garbage meat. Preserved meats from the trash. Ah, disgusting. Capella, constantly giving her toxic comments, turned her gaze slightly in Crush's direction. A sticky, feverish light entered her eyes as she pouted all her attention upon Crush, who subconsciously hugged herself tightly. When Capella spoke again, her voice was almost pleasant. Capella, but mixed with all that refuse is quite a slab piece of meat. So attractive, perfectly in line with tastes. This meat smells like the finest of meat. What beauty! That body! That appeal! Ah, I really want to break it with my own 2 hands. Crush, that's enough. Capella, ah? She'd become fascinated. Her expression trance-like, the black dragon leaned toward Crush, as if wanting to lick her from top to bottom. At this moment, the pressure of anger interjected to interrupt each other. Capella. Her attention still fixed on Crush, the dragon looked up impatiently. Julius, who had approached Crush in her distracted state, looked rather like a conductor. Julius, be burned by my 6-fold light, El Pralium. Julius's 6 spirits each gleamed with a different color, as they fired a beam of light upward. When that iridescent light reached Capella, it shone white, and she began to scream. Capella, gah! Julius, this is the price of your chatter. If you had any real skill, you wouldn't spout such nonsense. Obeying Julius's command, his spirits continually fired their scorching lights. With Capella's piercing scream serving as background music, the 2 swordsmen who had been silent and still, suddenly kicked off the slate ground, flying towards Subaru's group. Wilhelm, stop there. Garfield, the hell. Here, Garfield and Wilhelm both spoke up. Wilhelm flew straight for the swordswoman, while Garfield faced the giant twin blades with his own twin shields. Woman. Wilhelm, don't leave, show me your swordplay. As she began to retreat after meeting his first blow, Wilhelm cut her off with a sudden strike. The old swordsman full breakthrough struck up and down with the violence of a storm. The length of her blade wasn't conducive to quick action, which served her defense poorly as Wilhelm gave rapid strike after strike. Even so, the woman also proved fearsome. She cleverly shied away from any swing that she was unable to parry and smoothly, with practiced ease, regained her balance. Each time her whirling sword stabbed forth it became more apparent that the female swordsman's body was born for the sword to which she used. Wilhelm's skill was enough for him to challenge the white whale, but facing him, the woman's skill was enough to press Wilhelm back. Wilhelm, Gua. Woman. Issuing a roar, with momentum smooth as silk, Wilhelm's rotation of cuts and swings increased in speed. Although his body itself was old, his technique was still incredibly honed. His swordplay was the pinnacle of swordsmanship, and most young swordsmen would never match up to him. His blade a mere flash, he flew through the air, preparing to flatten the woman into the earth. Still silent, the woman was prepared to withstand each blow, her resolve steeled. Without words, without righteousness, the woman was like a doll whose only purpose was battle. Obedience had been carved into the body of this doll who only swung a blade. The collisions of steel erupted through the air like a blast. However, her sword must have been light, much lighter than Wilhelm's. Each side's swordplay was clean and pure, and aside from strikes on their respective targets, no unnecessary destruction happened. The two flew into their solitary dance of swordplay. Wilhelm, ha! Woman. The two waged their silent battle, their swords only being seen as flashes. This was the sacred realm of their duel, and intruders could not be tolerated. Not far away, another battle was being waged. Garfield, ya! Ha! Ya! Giant. Roaring, muscles flexing, Garfield deflected the giant's blows. Stuck with dizziness, he counterattacked, beating, roaring, visceral defeat, nausea, bones creaking. Unlike the elegant duel taking place next to them, this battle was one marked by chaos. Although the giant could be called a swordsman, his fighting style was different from what that would imply. It was irrational as a barbarian's or a beast's. Garfield, ha, ku, ah. Correspondingly, Garfield also fought without a sense of etiquette. Garfield's fighting style was wild and animalistic. Due to Subaru's influence, he'd named it Garfield's flowing battle. This was an absurd violence that only Garfield, who relied on instinct, could perform. It couldn't be imitated by anyone. In fact, Garfield's violent blows suited the barbaric giant before him. This obviously savage duel was one of stamina. The opponent who tired first would lose. Therefore, success or failure was incredibly variable. Giant. Those giant swords were so incredibly heavy that a direct blow would surely shatter Garfield's elbow, yet he needed to use his arms to deal with them. Garfield needed to decisively use his shields. Holding them obliquely, his arm blocks the massive sword, but he allows it to slide along the shield, thus parrying it away. The giant's unpredictable movements were no mere barbarism, but he used not the slightest trick. His strikes were shockingly direct and powerful. This could not be achieved with talent alone. The giant had clearly practiced tens of millions of swings to earn his power. Taking those swords head-on, blocking them, would surely be impossible. If there even a slight wrong move, the giant's sword would cleave the silver shield in half, and Garfield's body would resemble that broken shield. Garfield, don't kid round, no more. Garfield had been doing everything possible to combat the pressure of the large swords. As they slashed from above, as they swept from the sides, as they swung up from below, Garfield parried all of them. Then, from a gap, his arm took a punch, forcing Garfield to retreat. The trouble was, in addition to two powerful hands waving large swords, the giant had another 6 arms. Garfield's defense could be punctured with a third attack, and the giant had started using not 2, but 3 arms to wield swords. Garfield had the advantage in speed, but that giant's strength was far superior. As his chin was struck, as he parried those massive swords, his knees were kicked, sending his face plummeting toward the ground. For more blows followed this, but Garfield caught himself as he fell, and finally managed to block an attack, planting his feet firmly on the ground. Blood, broken bones, and bitter cries, those were what this savage battlefield was filled with. Watching the two passionate warriors, Subaru unable to interfere with that chaos. Subaru. On one side Wilhelm's quiet duel, and on the other was Garfield's chaotic war. Subaru and Crush held their breaths, unable to join the battlefield on either sides. This was not due to any inability, rather, they were too shocked by the fighting spirit from both sides to react. However, unlike Subaru, who was submerged in awe. Ricardo, this is bad, we have to act soon. Ricardo, who had been surveying Julius's magic, took a step forward. Seeing Ricardo's movement, Subaru issued a right and also began to move, but... Crush, Subaru-sama. Ricardo, get down. Feeling a sudden yank on his collar, Subaru found himself being dragged to the ground by Crush. Ricardo stood in front of the two, shielding them, releasing a ferocious roar. Ricardo, WAAA, HAAA. The fierce sound waves shook the atmosphere, creating an invisible force of destruction. This roaring wave was the same as the one Mimi and her brothers had used against the white whale. This was an incredibly powerful skill that had noticeably injured it, and Ricardo had just now unleashed it completely on his own. Beaten back by the roar was a glowing black flame. That dark flame had scattered in the face of that wave. The nature of the fire was even more frightening than its burning. Anything it touched crumbled to ash, which poured all over the square as it fell. However, the real horror in those scattered residual flames was, in fact, Subaru, that fire isn't going out. Blackish fell to the slate ground, still burning, without any sustenance. The flames continued to burn, and they swelled and stretched and spread. Any fire that had fallen on the surface of the water also continued to burn. Like dripping oil into the water, the fire leapt higher, as if showing its superiority. Ricardo, bro, how long are you planning to stay that way? Speaking of which, doesn't this situation usually happen in reverse? Julius, Subaru, no matter how you look at it, being protected by a woman is. Ricardo and Julius both offered discouraging words to Subaru, who was still recovering from the terror of scattered fire. From their point of view, Subaru lay on the ground, under Crush, who was deflecting any damage from him. Subaru, wah. Crush, it's great that you're unhurt. Please rest assured, I'll refrain from saying anything about this to Ferris and Emilia. Subaru, I feel even more ashamed for feeling relieved. Crush pulled him to his feet, adding another point to Subaru's shame score. Patting himself off, Subaru looked up to the source of the black flame. Of course, that was the black dragon, who sat wearing a frown. He could sense nothing from her but a sense of disgust. Capella, disgusting, disgusting, don't look at me with such an excited gaze. Stop looking, don't violate me with your dirty eyes. Ha 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 ha. It's like they say, you're forbidden from stroking any dancers who perform for you, so stop ravishing this charming lady. Ka ha ha ha. Subaru, how? Despite being directly attacked by Julius's magic, Capella acted as if nothing had happened. However, that wasn't to say that she hadn't suffered any harm. In fact, she'd suffered considerable damage from his attack. The dragon's right wing had been burned until it was no more than a festering bloodied piece of flesh. Perhaps she'd wanted to use the wing to protect her body, but injury had been the price for her body's safety. The magic had burned through the dragon's wing, reaching her body. Her abdomen had been scorched and melted, and her innards seemed to have been boiled. The right side of the dragon's face had been blown off, and her wagging tongue, which enjoyed ridiculing others, had been severed. Her eyes dangled freely, no longer resting in their sockets. Half dead wouldn't cut it, this was nothing but a corpse. Subaru audibly swallowed, Julius and Ricardo frowned, and Crush couldn't help but give a little girl's gasp. But this wasn't due to the dragon's horrific state. Instead, it was due to that battered flesh regenerating. Melted bones regrow, destroyed muscles lengthened, severed tissues sutured, Capella's destroyed body regenerated at an alarming rate. The impossible heat given off by her regeneration evaporated any remaining traces of blood. Capella, now having seen even my beautiful internal organs, are you satisfied? Are you a group of rotten garbage creatures who get turned on watching my metamorphosis? Ka ha ha ha. Satisfied? Hey, were you so satisfied you started leaking? Subaru, how, what happened? Capella, shouldn't you be able to tell on sight? Did you actually have to ask? How foolish are you? But this compassionate lady shall answer you. As you can see, I'm obviously immortal. Immortal. This was the simplest, most absolute description of her power. Subaru couldn't help but gulp at Capella's description of her own power. The thought that she was bluffing crossed his mind. Indeed, it would be comforting to think that she was bluffing. Subaru, it's nothing but a quick regeneration ability. Capella, call it what you want. I'm not strong enough to call it invincible, so immortal it is. Subaru. Capella, my, you're unable to even talk anymore. You disgusting rotten eggs. You putrid filthy meat. Go die. Everyone except me should go die. Wait. Capella interrupted her own foul words. She unfurled her healed wings and fluttered them, slowly bringing her bulky form toward the roof of the city hall. Thinking that she was preparing to swoop upon them, Subaru braced himself for her attack. However, Capella, time's up, I have to go make the next broadcast, so I'll go back inside. Talking to you is just a waste of time, and I'm in a hurry. You all just stay here and die, along with that rather lovely piece of meat. Go rot in hell. Subaru, ha? Suddenly losing interest, Capella yawned and stroked leisurely into the hall, where Subaru lost sight of her. He couldn't help but consider whether or not that was meant to lure her enemies deeper in. Julius, she might be trying to lure us in, don't you think? But we can't let her make that broadcast. Subaru, if we let her go, the city's going to fall into a panic. Everyone will find out what we're doing. We have to catch up with her. Some unknown hunch led him on. Furthermore, with that size, how did Capella enter the inside of the city hall? Although he didn't know how large the broadcast room was, it seemed that Capella would destroy the room with a single large movement. But he didn't have the time to consider this right now. Ricardo, alright, I'll stay with those two to deal with the guys on the outside. Bro, you'll go inside with Jalai-chan and Crush-san. Ricardo gave instructions to Subaru, who gave a questioning look at his decisive words. Ricardo, these swordsmen are a bit too much for you and Crush-san, and I'm not suited for indoor action. Jalai-chan can handle that pretty good. Don't you think? Julius, a very apt judgment. To be honest, I'd be worried leaving only Wilhelm and Garfield here, so I'll leave it up to you, Ricardo. Ricardo, of course, I won't disappoint. Julius and Ricardo nodded to each other, leaving no room for doubt. Being from the same faction, perhaps they could communicate their intent with only a glance. Subaru was unable to protest, so, scratching his head. Subaru, Garfield. You're absolutely not allowed to lose. After you send that guy flying and we defeat Lust, we're going to go save Amelia, you hear me? Garfield, Captain, I ain't got time to deal with you right now. Subaru spoke to Garfield, who was still engaged in his chaotic war. Next to him, Crush lifted a hand towards her mouth, aiming her voice in Wilhelm's direction. Crush, Wilhelm, I'll leave it to you. Wilhelm, no need to worry. Wilhelm gave a brief response to his master's brief words. A true master and vassal only needed those brief words. Then, led by Julius, Subaru and Crush made their move. Leaving the central square, the three ran toward the interior of the city hall. The two figures guarding the tower responded to this, foregoing their current opponents for Subaru's group. Ricardo, standing in a line like this makes things easier for me, ha. His ferocious laugh created destructive sound waves which swept up small scattered stones, and the giant and woman faltered slightly. Although the power of the roaring waves had begun to diminish, they were still effective in halting the two. Behind them, their opponents caught up, contempt in their eyes. Wilhelm, how discourteous ignoring me when I have eyes for only you. Garfield, don't turn your opponent unless you want it gone. Slashing and slicing, striking and stabbing, the chaotic duels in the square continued, fierce battles which allowed for no outside intervention. Unable to hear the sounds of the battle any longer, Subaru rushed toward the entrance of the city hall. Subaru, where would the room be? Crush, I don't know for certain, but I think it would be at the uppermost level, for the sound to reach as far as possible. Julius, there may be ambushes along the way, be careful. Passing the main entrance, they arrived inside the city hall. A place that should have been crowded, with a lovely lady providing a reception service and bright lights coloring the scene, was now dimly lit, in a state of apparent turmoil. Fortunately, there were no other cultists occupying this level, nor were there corpses strewn across the room, so. Subaru, come on, let's go. There should be some kind of floor map telling us where the room is. Julius, if we can, I'd also like to confirm the safety of the staff here, although that's looking a bit hopeless. Subaru, what's? He checked the help desk and confirmed that no one was hiding there, then pointed to the stairs. Julius ascended the steps quietly, peering deep into the corridor, and gently shook his head. Crush followed him with a frown, and, upon tracing his gaze, her expression trembled. Seeing her reaction, Subaru joined the two and seeing what they had, held his breath. With dragging, pitter-pattering steps, a figure appeared. Peeking around the stairs, a child wearing a devilish smile emerged. At first glance, he was only a kid. A petite physique, a childlike face, evoking an image of youthfulness. However, this notion existed in appearance only. His dark brown hair hung loose and his body was wrapped with a single cloth, giving him a rather grim appearance. With a devilish smile on his little face, his eyes looked as if they contained all the poisons in the world, with decaying glows and toxic liquids. They were, of course, not the eyes of human beings. And in the present circumstances, it was evident what was wrong with him. Kid, so happy, so very happy, so very, very happy, because of this happiness, such happiness, incredibly happiness, such incredible happiness, such incredibly incredible happiness, deserves a feast. Feast. It's been a really suffering wait with this empty stomach. So the first bite must be delicious to make up for it. Pleased, happy from the bottom of his heart, the barefoot boy marched as if dancing to a beat. As he spoke, he revealed his teeth, which were the length of a canine's. Seeing that image, that attitude, that exaggerated speech, Subaru's mind began to boil. If that wasn't just his imagination, if this boiling rage did indeed exist, then this kid was. Subaru, if you're some naughty kid who slipped in here playing hide-and-seek, explain yourself quickly. If that's really the case, we'll let you go. But, if not, hurry up and name yourself. Speaking in a low voice, Subaru deliberately forced himself to remain calm. And, as if deliberately provoking Subaru, the kid twisted his juvenile face in a mocking laugh. Kid, are you really confronting us with that attitude? Is that attitude meant for us or someone else? Check it for yourself. Subaru, that's enough. I can see that you're my enemy. Roy, we are the witch cult sin archbishops of gluttony, Roy Alford. Subaru, gluttony. As soon as the child claimed to be gluttony, Subaru struck with his whip. Slashing through the air, his whip mercilessly cut toward his enemy's face. However, Roy, well, it's hardly uncommon to encounter those who want a bite of us. His teeth biting the end whip, Gluttony spoke brazenly. Chapter 35, Ambushes and Surprises. Subaru's first merciless strike had been blocked by teeth. Subaru. Biting the front end of the whip, dancing as if deliberately intending to infuriate, was Gluttony Roy Alfred. Alfred. Subaru was a little surprised at the name. Subaru, this bastard also shares the name of a star hook. Crush, Subaru-sama, that topic is over. Allow me to engage him. As Subaru raised his arm for another brutal blow, Alfred drew his own weapon. At the same time, Crush unleashed her 100-man strike. A frenzied blade of wind instantly swept through the first floor of the city hall, bisecting chairs and the reception desk. Of course, the cut should also have mercilessly cut Alfred, but... Roy, wow, awesome. But although this one looks tough. Crush, eh? The boy, as if seeing the invisible blade of wind, bent over backward to avoid it. Like a bridge, his head rested on the floor briefly, before he flipped backward. That action had transformed him into a battle-ready pose. Roy, as an attack, that was a rather third-rate tactic. It doesn't seem all that delicious. Finished, Alfred leapt up from the ground, his body flying forward like a bullet. His mouth opened to expose rows of sharp teeth resembling a hound's. Coupled with his appearance, people would mistakenly think he was a straggly wild dog. Only, a wild dog's danger level could never compare. Crush brought her sword up to meet him, attempting to behead him, but... Roy, although your qualifications are good, they're not enough. To us, you're not even a beginner. Crush, As he waved his right hand, Crush's sword bounced away with a sharp sound. At a closer look, swaddled in the cloth wrapped around Alfred's wrists, were twin daggers. He held a dagger in each hand, a weapon allowing his thin, small body to fight with speed and flexibility. While parrying her sword, his left hand swept toward Crush's throat. Although she immediately shifted to avoid it, Alfred flipped through the air, around her shoulder, and kicked her aside. Crush, wah. Subaru, Crush-san. Roy, don't just stand there and watch when you're the easiest target. Alfred stomped on the ground, flying at Subaru. In the dim lighting, the thin figure of Gluttony, wrapped in rags, disappeared in the darkness. Subaru lost sight of his figure. Subaru, not good. Alfred, in your sloth, you couldn't keep up. Subaru, wah. Aiming at the flaw-filled Subaru, Alfred revealed another one of his flaws. Once, feeling powerless, Subaru had sworn to himself that no matter the situation, he wouldn't act impulsively and hastily. Biting his lip, he grounded himself with the pain, allowing their most powerful party member an opportunity to strike. And Julius's quiet command cut through the air. Alfred immediately managed to twist evasively, but his body was still cut down by the Knight of Knights. Gluttony rolled onto the floor, entire body covered with blood. Roy, ugh. Whoa, surprising. Julius, then, how about another surprise? Watch as my buds bloom. As Julius spoke, his spirits began another set of attacks as Alfred bounced back to his feet and darted away. At that moment, iridescence filled dim hall. An aurora blossomed forth from Julius's back, diving toward Gluttony. Roy, spirits. Julius, I hope one such as you, who appreciates gourmet, will enjoy. No matter which bud, I am proud to enjoy the bloom of these child flowers. Roy, awful, they're pretentious, we don't like them. Seeing the world burning in the aurora, Alfred spoke as he escaped high. Julius's thin sword followed his back, pressing him one, and he attempted to escape with a sharp jerk. Julius, Lollimancer. Subaru, don't call me by that name. Julie. Julius, take Valkyrie with you to the top floor. Stop the broadcast. While choosing one another's pseudonyms, Julius declared that he would hold off Alfred. While supporting a wheezing Crush, Subaru judged this as the most reasonable course of action, but he couldn't quite agree with it. The mocking boy who was darting around was, after all, Gluttony. This was the enemy who Subaru had pursued for more than a year. Saying that defeating him was one of Subaru's top priorities would be no exaggeration. Even though he was right there. Crush, I understand. Julie-sama, I will pray for your blade to be swift and true. Crush, hook. However, before Subaru could protest, Crush climbed to her feet and gave a response to Julius, her face full of unwillingness. Crush was another victim of Gluttony, having been robbed of her memory. Of course, she had also wanted to seize this chance for the search of her memory. Even so, she assumed her own responsibility and entrusted the fight Gluttony to others. Even aside those feelings, she was also well aware of her own lack of strength. Considering Subaru and Crush's abilities, this was the only way. Roy, so what's going to happen? How are we doing it? Are we all going together? Even the disappointing woman and scummy man can be served as appetizer. Then, Julie-sama will eat him, swallow him, nibble him, lick him, taste him, swallow him, bite him into pieces, and devour. Not bad. Julius, don't say anything unnecessary. I didn't become Julie in vain. While the auroras in the narrow space are gradually disappearing, Alfred is still a comfortable smile. Julius pursued the victory, the swords struck each other issued a steel sound. At this moment, Julius and Subaru instantly glanced. That line of sight is relative to Subaru, as if it means there is no need to go further. Subaru, ah, damn it. Listen. Bastard, you absolutely can't lose. Julius, that's my line. It doesn't matter, I won't know, I absolutely can't die here. Crush, let's go, Lalamancer-sama. Scratching his head, for time being, Subaru set aside his feelings, and made movements to comply. Although he should at least walk in front of Crush, in truth, although it was shameful, she could react to any surprise attack much faster than he could. Subaru chased behind the still wounded Crush, and they both sprinted up the next flight of stairs. Before leaving, he took one last look at Julius and Alfred. Julius seemed to have the advantage, but he couldn't let his guard down. Julius, go. Subaru, bastard. Aware of Subaru's gaze, Julius made him restless to the very end. Although he was incredibly annoying, the idea of something happening to him was troublesome. Subaru turned to follow Crush, bounding up the stairs in one breath. Knowing that an ambush may have been awaiting them, they immediately took another flight of stairs, heading toward the topmost room. And on the way there. Crush, Subaru-sama, I must apologize. If I am not mistaken, your priority should be gluttony. Subaru, stop it, Crush-san. Nobody thinks it's your fault. While keeping watch on the situation upstairs, Crush softly let out an apology. However, Crush should also be frustrated. Being apologized to would not heal the wounds either of them had. And he did not want to blame himself, if he were apologized to. Subaru, I'm sorry, REM. Please wait a little longer. Voicing the name of the girl who was still sleeping in the mansion, Subaru let out a heartfelt expression of regret. In fact, he would like to run back right now, and tear that sneering, malicious Archbishop limb from limb. If that brought her back, what would be wrong with it? The turmoil that would ensue would shake up the lives and deaths of many people. The consequences would be much easier to take in if he were a simple-minded person, unable to think ahead about these issues, although, he knew that if he did that, REM would probably be angry with him upon waking up. Crush. Crush said nothing to Subaru, who held his breath and repressed the emotions building up inside him. He just closed his eyes, expressing regret for his own apology, and they resumed their march with her at the forefront. The city hall was a 5-story building and Subaru and Crush were already on the 4th floor. There were conference rooms and archive rooms for paperwork on the middle floors, and from a quick check on the information displayed at each landing, it was safe to assume that the broadcasting room was located on the top floor. In other words, Subaru, Lust is also gonna be there. Crush, yes, that is true. But, considering the size of this corridor, would she really? Peeking into the corridor on the 4th floor, Crush raised her eyebrows in suspicion. Her question was natural, and Subaru held the same question. The corridor of the 4th floor was only wide enough for 4 people to walk side by side. At most. Albeit a guess taken at a distance, the black dragon looking down at the square seemed to be as large as an elephant. It was very hard to imagine that it would be able to fit into the corridors in the building. Of course, there was the possibility that, instead of ascending through the corridors, it had just destroyed the wall and forced its body into the room. Crush, what do you think? Subaru, at least, I don't think there's gonna be an ambush in the corridors. I guess you agree with that too, right, Crush-san? I think the real problem is an ambush at the broadcasting room, but it's been so long since they went inside. I'm sure that they're preparing something. Crush, yes, I reckon so. They'll probably be springing it there, in the broadcasting room. Subaru, no doubt about that, when you consider it's a place we'll definitely be coming to. However, the people who were supposed to be in the city hall have not been found so far. If we're not careful, then the hostage operation will. The more he thought about it, the number of bad situations coming to his mind increased. It was not the kind of problem that would be solved with just martial prowess. Crush's fighting power was, as stated by herself, average, and she could not be relied upon to use magic. Subaru's ability was also decreased because of Beatrice's departure from the front lines. And to boot, upon close inspection, it was clear that a lot of blood was pouring from his right leg. Subaru, of course, being all gung-ho as in no pain, no gain is no good. Once the battle taking place outside finishes, we should be able to join them down there, and the situation should quickly change as well. Crush, in that case, there is no reason for Lust to postpone the broadcast any further. In the end, Subaru-sama, and I have no option other than acting to prevent it. Subaru, the best way to deal with an ambush. Crush asserted and stared at Subaru. Feeling himself overpowered by that passionate gaze, Subaru gulped. Subaru, Crush-san? Crush, I have heard from Wilhelm that Subaru-sama is the one able to come up with the optimal solution to these situations. And so, I believe it as well. Subaru, that's some heavy trust. Wilhelm's overestimation of Subaru's performance was compounded even further by Crush's own expectations, who had forgotten the times when Subaru had been underrated by everyone. Feeling as if he were about to be crushed by the weight of the expectations being placed on him, Subaru mused about it as much as he could in the short time he had left. And, even although he was not completely sure of it, he came to a decision. Subaru, what can we do to deal with an ambush? Crush, yes? Subaru, if someone's going to wait for us as a matter of course. Let's break that course. There were several important elements of an ambush. First of all was the location. Ambushes were a tactic that had been put in place by an opponent waiting for opportunity to attack an enemy from a dominant location. That was the most essential element. Secondly, the enemy needed to indeed appear at the set location. Finally setting the ambush, but finding the key opponent missing would render it completely pointless. Moreover, it was also necessary to speculate on the time when the enemy would arrive at the place of ambush. If there were a lack of concentration of ambushes en route, their effects could not be maximized. So, assuming that Lust was setting an ambush, all three of these conditions had been fulfilled. In any event, they needed to break into the broadcast room within a set amount of time. From their enemy's perspective, there was no prey that would be more enjoyable to hunt. Subaru, therefore, we must first destroy this situation. Crush, I understand this point. No, I've decided to believe in Subaru. I will say no more. Having arrived at the topmost room, they found a staircase. That is, a staircase to the rooftop, where the Subaru and Crush would have to be prepared to defeat Capella's strategy. Crush, who was initially puzzled by Subaru's proposal, seemed determined. This way of doing things was her invariable merit, both before and after losing her memory. Crush, I honestly just want to see how the battle in the square is faring. Subaru, but if we go check on them, then our actions will be meaningless. Even at this height they could hear the clashing of sword and Garfield's cursing. That fight was still ongoing, so no aid from that front could be expected. Subaru, speaking of which. Looking around, Subaru examined the situation of the roof. Claw marks had been left everywhere on the ground, traces of the black dragon walking around. The railings and fences that looked over the square were collapsed by the magic that Julius released. Subaru thought of that terrible power, as he examined the room, confirming that they really were below the broadcast room. Of course, Capella would be waiting there in ambush. Crush, Subaru, what happened? Please take a moment if you're unprepared. Crush, I'm sorry, but just now, I noticed something. Subaru. Crush spoke rather weakly as Subaru busied himself with an iron fence. Subaru looked at her with surprise, and she looked back at him with a stiff expression. Crush, I seem to have a certain fear of heights. Subaru, an unexpected weakness, got it. Ready. Confirming that it has been fixed firmly, Subaru nodded toward Crush, who returned a stiff one, and stepped meekly into Subaru's arms. Crush, please don't let go. Subaru, Crush-san, there are many men who will misunderstand, so it's be better if you don't say those kinds of words often. Crush? Crush turned her head with a wry smile. Then, with Crush nestled in his arms, clinging to him, he swung loose from the building. Of course, their bodies were drawn downward by gravity. As they fell, they reached the lowest point the whip wrapped around Subaru's wrist would allow them to. Subaru, hook. At the same time, supporting the weight of the both of them, Subaru's shoulders were in enough pain to be in danger of breaking. Twisting sideways, the two swung in an upward arc, reaching another outer wall of the city hall. Seeing a window approaching, Subaru stretched out his feet and broke through it. Crush, ga hook. Subaru, wah. As the glass shattered, Subaru and Crush rolled into the broadcast room. For a moment, Crush seemed to let loose a small cry, but Subaru pretended not to hear it as he released her from his arms. Both climbed to their feet, immediately looked around and found that dragon, hook. Staring blankly at the two who had just jumped in, with eyes wide open, was a black dragon sitting in a stiff posture. The same massive body that they had seen on the roof was stuffed into the room. The black dragon had folded her wings, facing the door that one would normally enter from. Presumably, she had originally intended to turn Subaru to ash the moment he tried to enter, but that strategy had been completely defeated. Obstructed by her huge body, she was in a room that confined her movement greatly. Although the black dragon attempted to prepare herself to attack, moving her wings. Subaru, Crush-san. Crush, right. As if ridding herself of her fear of heights, Crush nodded a response before loosing her cut. Her blade of wind sliced into the black dragon, damaging a wing and severing a frontal leg. The black dragon screamed loudly as dark blood began to spray. Dragon, ahhhhhhhhhhh. Subaru, watch out. Get down, Oa. Capella writhed in pain, her dragon wings sending the room into disarray as she flapped her wings wildly. Although this room was rather larger than usual, its durability was not so strong that it could withstand the riots of an elephant-sized creature. In order to escape from this destruction, Subaru turned to run, but at that moment he found. At the foot of the black dragon, a chained young girl trembled. Girl. Subaru met eyes with that tearful girl. Realizing that Lust had adopted a very effective hostage strategy, should the initial ambush fail, Subaru was filled with rage. Focusing, Subaru instinctively chose to move forward rather than escape. Thinking of a way to dodge the tail hanging over his head, he slid toward the little girl. Picking up the trembling petite body, he flicked his whip fiercely at the black dragon's back. It didn't seem to inflict too much damage, but it allowed Subaru to express his rage. But Crush's strikes were not so powerless. Dragon, wait. Wait. I'm not, Hook. Crush, no need to answer. This is retribution for the disaster you've wrought upon the city. Crush's relentless blade moved as if it had a mind of its own. With an almost disappointing fragility, Capella bore no defense to that force. Crush cut the remaining wing, and Capella gave a keening wail. Although this likely didn't have much to do with Subaru, that huge body was shaken violently by a plethora of attacks, and she stumbled backwards to the opposite direction of the window Subaru had broken. The black dragon's wings didn't regenerate this time. Although she'd called her body immortal, if this was her speed of regeneration, then it could not be called a threat. Crush, it's over. Dragon, why? Not allowing her to finish, Crush loosed several successive attacks on the black dragon's body, head, and wings. Her huge body hit the wall hard, smashing through the window frame and falling outside. The falling black dragon would like to expand the wings, but one side of the dragon wing is chopped from the roots, the other side of the dragon wing is like being hooked fragmented, it is unable to support the state of flight. Dragon, hook. The black dragon, without a chance to regenerate, had no time to say anything, simply falling to the ground. A few seconds later, Lust hit the ground with the sound of meat hitting a wall, or a wet towel falling to the floor. Crush, I'll go confirm the situation. Subaru-sama, can you take care of this child? Subaru, alright, I got it. Watching the black debris falling from edge of the window, was the ever-vigilant Crush. With heartfelt trust in her, he also set down the girl he just recovered. The girl was still in a state of fear, confusion in her quivering gaze as she looked at Subaru. This was inevitable. After that long, anyone would be afraid. Subaru, it's okay, the dragon just now has been killed by the superheroine big sister over there, though not easily, where's everyone else? Girl, Subaru, although it is hard to believe, we're one of our own, and came here in order to save you. We have to finish shortly, before the bad guy comes back. Can you help me? He bent his knees, keeping their lines of sight the same, and spoke with a steady tone. This was the unconscious behavior he would use whenever speaking to someone younger. She seemed to calm down slightly, taking deep breaths as if steeling herself before replying. Girl, there's a room over there, everyone's in there. Subaru, is it locked? That room. The girl pointed to a little room inside the broadcast room. Actually, this room wasn't the broadcast room, right? Although the room was large, there was no broadcast equipment at all. Even if the radio was a magic device, Subaru could find anything that it could possibly be in this room. Then, the room that the girl was pointing to was most likely the real broadcast room. As he turned his gaze over, Subaru hesitated. He wanted to inquire about the life or death of the people inside. However, asking the girl such a thing was far too cruel and inconsiderate. Subaru touched the still shaking girl's head, slowly making his way toward the room. Girl. Heart trembling, Subaru felt sweat break out on his neck. Even the chaotic battle seconds earlier hadn't made him so nervous, but suddenly, his throat felt parched and dry. This was the sense of a nasty premonition, a terror which preoccupied his mind. Crush, Subaru-sama? Subaru, everything's fine. I'm about to start looking around. What happened to Lust? Crush, everything's fine here too. I don't know why, but she's staying where she is. Crush replied with that warning about Lust. After hearing that answer, Subaru took a deep breath and headed for the room, reaching out to brush the doorknob. In the radio room, there was a possibility of other cultists hiding. That would be something Subaru needed to take into consideration. But, for some reason, that kind of worry seemed superfluous. In fact, this idea is right. Because, in actuality, no cultists occupied that room. Occupying it was. With speechless gazes, they looked at Subaru with amazement. No, maybe he just assumed they were looking. Subaru had no way of understanding how they observed the world, and he didn't particularly want to know. He simply felt dismay. His voice wouldn't work. This situation could only be described as speechless. His thoughts froze, and he thought of nothing. However, there was something he finally did understand. The source of that irritating sound accompanying the broadcast he'd heard in the shelter. Subaru, what is this? In response to Subaru, that voice spoke. That voice was one which welcomed Subaru, a fearsome sound, a defiant sound, a joyful sound, a meaningless sound. The sound of numerous beating wings echoed throughout the room. In the darkened room, countless blinking red compound eyes moved, as if watching Subaru. The broadcast had sounded as if many flies had been crammed into one room. And all the flies were the same size as people, this one, that one too, all of them. Ah. Subaru. In a sea of blankness, Subaru registered a sudden pained cry. Shocked into a sudden response, Subaru slammed the door, closing along with it the sound of 100 beating wings. Looking back, he found. Ka-ha-ha-ha-ha. Stupid. You dregs, the meat in your head simply isn't enough. You actually tried to match me in a battle of the wits? Who put the sugar into your brain and melted your cerebrum? Ka-ha-ha-ha-ha. Crush was crushed under the heel of the girl who issued that sharp raucous laughter. There was no doubt that this was that familiar poisonous laughter. Capella, it's me, Capella-chan. Ka-ha-ha-ha-ha. As Capella winked and stuck out her tongue, Crush vomited blood, the whites of her eyes barely showing. Chapter 36, The Beginning and the Conclusion of Love. Behind him was a room full of gigantic flies. Subaru and Crush had defeated the black dragon, and it now lay motionless on the ground outside. And yet, in front of Subaru was a laughing girl who repeatedly dug her foot into Crush. Sinister laughter, a sardonic tone. The person in front of him was undoubtedly Lust, Capella Emerata Lagunica. His entire body began to tingle. Subaru, what is this? Capella, do you actually have to take time to think about it? You scum shouldn't worry about such things. The best choice for you is to recognize the reality before you. You saw a beautiful maiden shaking with fear. But her true identity is an archbishop of the witch cult. As Subaru's mind raced, Capella danced around, sticking her mocking tongue out at Subaru. Crush's eyes rolled back as she was relentlessly attacked. Capella, didn't you find it strange at all? Here at the city hall, why would there be a child meet? But your first reaction was doubtlessly, this kid is in danger, I have to save her. What a disappointingly stupid train of thought. Subaru, shut up, already. There's plenty I'd like to say, but first, move your damn foot. Capella, Are you so captivated by my beautiful legs that you're dripping already? Or are you thinking of this sow that's licking my feet? Indeed, she has a lovely body. Are you trying so hard that you can't restrain yourself right now? Ka-ha-ha-ha-ha. Subaru. This bitch. Bastard, we're not just creatures for you to tread on. Capella wore an ecstatic expression and her heel ravaged Crush again and again. In response to her atrocious actions and ridicule, Subaru's veins boiled with rage. His lower body tensed, ready to move forward. Capella, who had provoked Subaru, seemed to welcome an attack. However, Subaru was not so foolish as to blindly rush forward. Even without her memory, Crush was a fearsome warrior. Her strength had been vouched for by Wilhelm. And yet, in the few seconds that she'd vanished from Subaru's sight, she'd lost without any resistance. Lust's strength was undoubtedly far above Subaru's. Subaru needed to solve the situation without engaging her in combat. Subaru. Crush, whose very life was in danger, needed to be immediately recovered and taken to Julius and the others. It was up to him to engineer an escape, abandoning their mission in the process. Although they had failed to stop the broadcast, that mission wasn't worth their lives. And they also hadn't found the people who they should be rescuing, at least not on this floor. His only conclusion was that their reserve of combat power wasn't enough to retake the city in secrecy. Therefore, Subaru could not hesitate. Capella, ha. Subaru, ha. Capella exhaled, slightly surprised by Subaru's sudden action. The target of Subaru's whip was not Capella, but a shelf on the side wall. He found a metal bust, large enough to be embraced by two arms, and wrapped in it his whip, deftly flicking his wrist and bringing it toward Capella. Subaru now wielded a high-speed metal whirlwind. His weapon now had the power to open a seam in the wall. Whether to block or evade, she would need to remove her foot from crush. Subaru would take advantage of that moment to retrieve her. Subaru, take that. Capella, I will. Subaru, huh? In contrast to the Subaru's frenzied cries, Capella responded with casual words. The sound of a hard object encountering bones and flesh was accompanied by blood spurting forth from Capella's forehead, which had been torn almost completely apart. The inside of her scalp was visible, and blood stained her torn cheeks. Subaru could no longer bear to look at what had originally been such a cute face. Her left eye had been half destroyed, and its light had vanished. This unexpected situation left Subaru's mind momentarily blank. His action had been intended to create a distraction for his enemy, but he'd been caught off guard instead, and an archbishop certainly wouldn't let that moment go. Capella, aren't you cute to think that I'd play right into the palms of your hands? Isn't this kind of helpless stupidity a problem for you? Ka ha 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 ha. Capella's mocking slipped into Subaru's frozen thoughts. The girl turned to face the stiff Subaru, and, in the next moment, a gust of a black whirlwind hit him, abruptly sending him flying. Subaru, gah. Smacked by a gigantic force, his right half took a heavy blow, and Subaru was knocked into a table before rolling to the ground. His entire body was shook. He dizzily climbed to his feet, bracing himself against the wall. What he saw next was... Capella, what's wrong? Are you so stunned by my beauty that you can't even move? Subaru, what just happened? Capella, you actually have to ask? Just use your eyes for once. Capella happily swayed her body, and Subaru couldn't even articulate a cry of anguish. He saw that what had just attacked him was a dragon's tail, sprouting from behind the petite girl. That disconcerting appearance imprinted itself upon Subaru's consciousness. Subaru, could you be a dragon? Capella, right your hopeless brain, which couldn't realize the truth even upon impact. Even after this gentle lady has specifically given you so many hints, you can't imagine it, you helpless scummy meat. Subaru. Capella waved her tail lightly as Subaru took in her physiology. Her long tail gave a fierce sweep, and the ground cracked as Subaru barely threw himself aside in time. But... Capella, isn't your relief naive? Subaru, wah. However, as he prepared to pull himself to his feet, Subaru hit by her huge left wrist. As he bounced away, he took another hit from the dragon tail awaiting him, and after a violent impact with the ceiling, was slashed by Feathered Wing, before finally coming to a rest on the ground. Coughing violently as the impact sent him rolling across the floor, he witnessed the true face of the terror that had attacked him. Where before there had only been a black tail, now there was a fist covered in animal hair. Then came that black tail from before, and finally, a pair of bird's wings, long enough for the sharp feathers to slash across Subaru's body. And these all belonged to that young girl's form. Capella, you should have just about figured the answer out, right? Alien was the only word that came to mind. A dragon's tail, a beast's arm, the wings of a great bird, all on a human girl. He couldn't think of any other suitable words to describe her. A wordless description of this creature that shouldn't exist could be given as a sense of physical aversion. He could feel nothing but a sense of disgust toward the monster in front of him. Subaru, variation, transformation. Capella, I am the Sin Archbishop of Lust, Capella Emirata Lugunica. All the love and respect in this world exists to be monopolized by myself alone. If someone loves me, no matter how abnormal their desire is, I'll respond. In short, I am the ultimate embodiment of all kinds of virtue and beauty in the world. Any girl matching your preferences, I can become. Hey, I'm a dutiful woman, aren't I? Ka ha 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 ha. While wantonly speaking nonsense, Capella turned to face Subaru and began to freely change her form. She shifted from her abnormal shape back to the tiny girl, but her hands and feet, and then immediately extended to become the adult body of a grown woman. Just as Subaru realized this, she changed into a simple village girl, but in the next moment has become a maiden with a lewd smile. Capella, now, how do you like me? Subaru. Speechless. He was unable to say anything. One glance and he realized that this was the worst possible situation. She was a desecration of human values. In this sense, her ability was obvious. The power of lust was to desecrate and trample on various values, so that she would be the only loved thing in the world. And with just a look, he saw that the wound marring her face had been long healed, without a traces of the injury left behind. Her terrible ability to regenerate or, in reality, her ability to transform, had long cured her old injuries. In any case, he'd finally solved the mystery of how the dragon had become a girl. He'd originally thought she was like Betelgeuse, able to use the bodies of others, but if that weren't the case. Subaru, what? If that weren't the case, then what had happened with the dragon from earlier, and the flies in the broadcast room? Capella, have you finally realized it? Subaru, wait a second. As if she'd read his innermost thoughts, Capella's expression had changed, and she laughed mockingly. She'd become a long-haired lady, and even the sound of her laughter changed as well. In this situation, where he was uncertain of even who he was speaking to, Subaru shook his head. This can't be, it's impossible, it could never be true. However, were he right, everything up until now could be explained. Capella's lust allowed her to change and transform her body. And if this ability of hers were effective on objects other than her physical body? Capella, has your waterlogged brain finally realized the identity of those disgusting flies? Subaru, they there. Capella, hurry and give your answer, and I'll hear you out. Gahahahaha. Capella covered her mouth with her hand and laughed loudly. Hating that attitude from the bottom of his heart, Subaru said in a trembling voice. Subaru, they're the people in this building who you've transformed. Capella, correct, but you were pretty slow, so no prizes. I won't give you any appreciation. Ah, pointless scum, why do you exist? Anyway, I am totally unreadable. Subaru, those are my lines. Capella didn't look in the least guilty about this brutal atrocity. Needless to say, she just stuffed those people into a dark room. When their red eyes had fixed themselves on Subaru, their wings, which weren't capable of flight, had been flapping desperately, issued a loud buzzing flutter. They must have been asking for his help then. Subaru, there's something wrong with your head. Why, how could you do such a thing? Why would you do it? Turning people into flies, why? Capella, it's horrifying, right? Subaru, it's beyond twisted. You. Capella, maybe it's just because I can't help but create disgusting creatures? Again, Subaru couldn't find words to respond. With harsh breaths and clenched teeth, Subaru fixated on her with a fiery, intense gaze of hatred, as if trying to kill her with his sight. She could play with the lives of others, even turning them into flies. Those atrocities were even worse than murder. In these few hours, Subaru had successively encountered 4 archbishops who he'd never met before. Wrathful Sirius was a madwoman who manipulated the emotions of others and craved a selfish love. Greedy Regulus self-righteously and forcefully imposed his own values upon others. Gluttonous Alfred stole memories and existences, a poison to humanity who could escape punishment. And lustful Capella was a monster who stripped away human dignity and identity. They were all hopeless, guilty of madness. Capella. In contrast to the enraged Subaru, Capella had settled into a bored silence. In the next second, she took on a mocking tone. As Subaru raged, Capella spoke. Capella, indeed, it's annoying and disgusting. Facing Subaru's wrath, Capella gave a more pleasant smile. She clapped her hands together, pointing to the room packed with flies. Capella, when you look at a room full of giant flies, you get a horrible sense of physical disgust, isn't that right? And of course, no matter who looks at those ugly creatures, they can't help but want to run. Subaru, what does that? Capella, no matter who, everyone feels disgusted with that ugliness. And those scum have become insects that I can't bear to look at. It's a matter of course that no one would love them. Subaru, so, what are you trying to say? Capella, human beings however, are creatures that cannot live without loving or being loved. But when their loved ones become such creatures, no matter how much they want to, they just can't love them. In that case, they have to redirect love to others. No matter how reluctant they are, they just can't love anything dirty. His mind went blank. Tilting her head slightly, she spoke her monstrous words. Listening to her clapping, Subaru was overtaken by a desire to escape. Now, immediately, without hesitating for even a second, he wanted to disappear to a place without this monster. His body didn't want those eyes on him, his ears didn't want to hear that voice, his mind didn't want to remember that presence, all in a sense of physical disgust. Wasn't she the embodiment of aversion? Something which he was genuinely unable to stand, wasn't that the definition of the horror that stood before him? Capella, so gentle and merciful, I really am the perfect woman. Since it was decided that I'd monopolize all the world's love and respect, then I absolutely cannot slack on my duty. In order to be loved better, I'll work hard to be loved, and change myself to suit your tastes. In order to capture your attention, I'll take away everything you're interested in, everything but me. Loving anyone is okay, but you'll choose me in the end. I'll work hard to make that happen. I'll improve better, improve my own charm. And reduce the charm of the meats who aren't me. Anyone, no matter who, would fall for this world's most beautiful and charming me. Subaru, just kill me already. Capella, why? I'm a philanthropist, how could I be so brutal as to kill you? Even if you're worthless scum, if there's a chance that you'll love me, even if there's a tiny, slight chance, for every single person, I'll let them live even one more second if they'll give me my due praise. Only those who can't will be killed. Above all, Capella-sama is a commendable praiseworthy woman. Subaru. 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 Subaru, I see now. Capella, do you? Well, now that you understand, quickly give your appreciation to Capella-sama. Let yourself be melted by Capella-sama's love and become my favorite piece of meat. Subaru, go to hell. He couldn't think. But there was no need to think. The enemy in front of his was truly the most vicious enemy. Everything other than that piece of knowledge was entirely unnecessary. Subaru's whip suddenly flew forward. The monster jerked backwards as her face was suddenly attacked, removing her dirty foot from Crush. Taking advantage of that opening, Subaru immediately moved, picking up Crush. Capella, witness because you wanted that slab of meat, your fluids won't stop leaking. Didn't you deny it earlier? Didn't you say so many beautiful words? Don't you like beautiful things? Don't you like cute things? Don't you like soft and comfortable things? Subaru. Chasing Subaru, Capella spread her arms apart, reaching her wrist toward him. One hand turned into the head of a snake, while the other became the head of a lion. Those distorted heads chased Subaru, showing their canines while crawling up and down the floor of the room. Although his right foot had begun to bleed again, he still felt no pain. Feeling the body temperature and weight in his arms, making every effort to protect the woman he carried, Subaru focused every last bit of his athletic ability on dodging. Capella, do you care so much for that scum? Then, for the rest of your short life, hold tightly and don't let go. Those tempting eyes. Those sweet lips. That sweet meat. Because she's stimulating, you're clinging too desperately to her, unable to let go? Die. Die. Go die. Go die right now. Subaru, do not talk nonsense, bastard. I'm not that kind of person. Capella, quiet. Scum should just obediently stay put and emanate the stench of rubbish. Sows should obediently stay put and emanate the stench of an animal. You've never thought of it? Can you honestly say that you've never thought of it for even a second? Doesn't that 1 second make it that kind of obscene relationship? What's the difference? What's the difference? Tell me what the difference is. The snakes and lions writhed as if resembling Capella's excitement, wantonly twisting across the room. The sound of teeth crunching a wooden desk, sending its legs flying, disassembling its body. That same force sought Subaru, trying again and again to reach him. Caught in the center of that destructive storm, issued a pained cry, Subaru guarded Crush's body, desperately avoided the continuous attacks. Capella stood at the exit of the room. Even if he wanted to take the opportunity to escape, Capella's body expanded and contracted, changing back and forth between women, girl, and maiden, in an anomaly that looked to be taboo. Capella, don't you want to stroke her hair? Don't you want to brush her lips? Don't you want to hold her body? Those cheap thoughts are always justified with beautiful words, with love a shield. Love is beautiful, isn't that just a self-righteous justification? Aren't you using beautiful words to cover up your desires? Subaru, you. Capella, admit your lust directly. Don't try to hide it behind love. Or are you refusing to say it? Refuting what's already been determined. My love for her is because of her innermost feelings. Her nobility, her gentleness, her compassion, her temperance, her sky-blue eyes. She's willing to live for others, she has the strength to endure injustice, her vulnerability that she shows only to me, I don't want to leave her alone. That reassuring voice, that loving gaze, those eyes that steal my moodiness away, the lips that call my name so gently, the warmth that grips both of my hands, the excitement in my heartbeat when we touch, that beautiful hair swaying in the wind. Because fate brought us together, because I believe that only she'd accept me, because she's always by my side when I'm sad, because she's taught me so many important lessons, because we've been together for all of this time, I want to see and feel the same things that she does from now to forever. Because we promised, I swore to never forget, and only I know her, and only in front of her can I be myself. Because I was so lonely, I always wanted someone to understand me. You told me that initial thought is what leads one person to love another. You were the one who took away the flow of my tears, you were the one who emerged from the boundless sea of people to find me, you were the one who hugged me tightly when I collapsed, you were one who scolded me for first time because I was naive, you were the one who told me the undisguised truth, you were the one who told me so much that I never knew before, you were the one who took me to see so many sights I'd never seen before, you were the one who took my hand, out of my birdcage in. No matter when, you support me, no matter what, you understand me. We're meant to be together, always, I can't live without you, you're my everything, you love me because I love you too, because your chest is so warm, because with you, all of the colors of the world shine so brilliantly, I can't feel happiness without you, I can't live without you. In this world so filled with lies, only this is truth. With a still expression, Capella spit those words out as if they were curses. As she spoke this long, touching confession, Capella's face was intertwined with beauty, adoration, obscenity. And with an even more complex and strange expression. Capella, all of them, aren't they just sweet nothings? Subaru. Capella, those are all words meant only to placate others, what's the harm in removing them? Do they have any sincerity? Any character? They're merely nauseating nonsense, how annoying. Acts. They're nothing but acts. In truth, you've only been attracted by the appearance of that meat. If you could really feel love with those who you speak affectionate words to and share affectionate touches and pillow talk with, see what happens when they become a fly. Could you love them? Are you not afraid of them? Are you not disgusted? No. You'd feel nothing but disgust oozing from your every pore. Well. Think about what you've said. Insane verbal abuse, a delusion of victimization, jealousy, hate, self-obsession. Spit splashing across the room, Capella lost control of herself as she hysterically destroyed the room. The snake's hiss, the lion's roar, Capella's cries, Subaru couldn't stand to listen to them any longer. The noise became like storm, and the room began to collapse. No matter what he did, he couldn't see anything past the smoke. How was his foot? Could he still use it, injured and torn as it was? The only thing he was certain of was the heartbeat of the woman in his arms, which continued to infuse Subaru with determination. But even such a fight would come to an end here. Capella, hey, meat. I can see you. Subaru, huh? Breaking through the smoke, the lion's head suddenly rushed in. Then the fangs snapped at Subaru's right foot, and tore off a large chunk, blood spurting forth fiercely. The injury had already directly exceeded the limit that Ferris could handle, and Subaru's mind began to boil as he struggled through the pain of losing his right foot. He issued a violent cry of agony that his throat was unable to bear. Of course, he couldn't support his own body anymore. As he collapsed, Crush rolled onto the ground in front of him. And his blood began to overflow. This was no exaggeration. It appeared as if a bucket of blood had been suddenly overturned. It was clear that his life had entered a rapid decline. Capella, what a headache. It seems that I couldn't help but get excited. How impolite of me. Ha. Subaru. Maintaining his position on the ground, Subaru stuck one convulsing hand to his wound. Although the palm of the hand was blocking the wound, the momentum of the bleeding had not diminished. In fact, another feeling began to well up in Subaru's body. Soon, everything would end. This was the familiar feeling of death, a feeling which gradually approached Subaru. In just a few hours, he'd felt the pain of the loss of his right foot twice. His face transcended paleness to take on a yellow pallor, and his breathing sped up and up as his eyes grew bloodshot. Capella, oh my, aren't you about to die? Watching the agony this piece of meat is in, is particularly distressing for my compassionate self who feels for others. Subaru, Capella, the piece of meat that you've been protecting is also going to die soon. It's such a shame that I indulged in my hobby a little bit, and decided to see if she'll lose to my blood. Capella squatted down, glancing at Subaru's twisted, agonized face. Then the monster smiled and stretched a hand to the wound on his foot. Capella, I wonder what kind of ugly meat you'll become. Subaru. As she spoke, Capella turned her other hand into a blade, cutting into the hand that had just been caressing Subaru's wound. And, bit by bit, her blood flowed into Subaru. Red and black blended together, blood blend with each other, forming a rather indecent scene. And Subaru, Capella-sama's blood is different from ubiquitous common blood. Mine is mixed with dragon's blood, which contains a great curse. Could you maybe last a bit longer than the other one? Capella hummed happily, but Subaru couldn't form any kind of reply. His entire being was half dead, and even his pain had become sluggish. Just a second before he died, the blood that had plunged into his wound ravaged and eroded his body. As if a foreign body with self-awareness had entered his body, a fear of a much higher degree than that original pain ravished Natsuki Subaru, as if attempting to completely rewrite his existence while merging with him. Unable to understand, not allowed even the mercy of death. And compared to Crush? It was as the monster had said. She was suffering the same pain. If she had to endure such a pain, she'd be better off dead. Let us die. Let us die. Let me die. Let me die. Let me die. Capella, gahahaha. Well, then the invaders have been well taken care of. Well, it's about time that I... After looking back and forth at the collapsed Subaru and Crush, Capella stood, satisfied. She reverted to the petite girl's form, her tail vanishing as she headed toward the broadcast room. As she turned, she paused. Her gaze fell on the wall that had been destroyed when the decoy dragon had been attacked. Capella, my, they were pretty decent after all. And, after having fallen from the building only a short while ago, the black dragon had again taken to the skies. Seeing its enemy, it gave a deafening roar, before breathing a mouthful of black flames. At that moment, black flames engulfed the city. End of chapters 33 through 36, Stratagem on the City Hall.